First book of Kings, chapters 16 to 18 today, and we kick off with another new prophet called Jehu, or Yehu if it's a soft J, don't know. He comes along anyway, prophesying that King Baasha, the terrible one from the previous video who killed all of Jeroboam's family, exactly the same fate is going to fall on his family as well, i.e. they're all going to be killed and dogs are going to eat their bodies in the streets. That's something, I suppose, delightfully poetic about the absolutely terrible king who did this to the previous guy, then having that happen to him. So I think that's kind of a nice start. As part of this, we have a lot more terrible kings, specifically descended down the Jeroboam line, i.e. the kings that aren't descended from David and are king of the 11 of the 12 tribes of Israel. And to my particular delight, Baal comes back again. For people who haven't been watching or haven't seen any of the older videos, Baal is what I called the fake god Baal, because I didn't know how to pronounce it. Then found out it was pronounced Baal, but Baal is funnier, so we're sticking with Baal still. We haven't heard from him for quite a while, so I'm strangely delighted he's back, even though he is terrible. Also of note here is that one of these terrible kings builds the city of Samaria, so I guess that's where that comes from. I'm not familiar with anything particularly Sumerian, but you do hear a lot about Sumerian legends and that sort of thing, so vaguely interesting. We then have yet another prophet, but it's one I've actually heard of, and this is Elijah. I don't really know anything about him, I just remember hearing the name Elijah, so I think he's going to be a bit of a big deal. But he comes along anyway, prophesying that there's going to be this multi-year drought. After he's delivered this disappointing news, God tells him to go off and hide, and he's going to hide in this specific place by a brook, so it gives him water, and then ravens are going to bring him bread and meat. So, not ideal, I guess, but this was before food standards existed, so I guess if you're going into a drought, then at least you're being fed and watered. Because, of course, he's predicted this multi-year drought, the brook shortly after dries up, and then God tells him he needs to go and see this specific widow, presumably just for purposes of just shelter, I think. But Elijah goes to her anyway and asks her to make him some bread. And she's a little reluctant because she says she hasn't got much flour. She only has a small jar of flour and a small jug of olive oil. But God at this point says that the flour and oil will not run out until the rains fall. Bearing in mind that's multiple years away, so it seems unlikely. As it turns out, though, this is what happens. And the lady is from this small jar that's about to run out. She manages to make enough bread for multiple years for herself, her son, and for Elijah. So we have ourselves some sort of, I guess, a minor miracle, to the extent that any miracle can be minor. But it then goes up a notch, however, because the boy falls sick, not sure why. And it says that he gets very sick, stops breathing, and dies. The widow gets upset thinking, is this something that she's done? Is she being punished? And Elijah calls out to God, carries the boy upstairs, and then he comes back to life. Not much detail. I mean, it doesn't actually state that he was dead. It just says he stopped breathing, and that could be translation. But I mean, either way, something very dramatic happened there. So interesting anyway. God then sends Elijah to see King Ahab, no relation of Captain Ahab. King Ahab, I believe, is the one who replaced King Baasha and is on the 11 tribes of Israel side, descended from Jeroboam, i.e. not descended from David. And it's noted that King Ahab is such a terrible king that he's worse than all of the ones who went before him, who were also super terrible kings. So proper spectacularly terrible. Before Elijah goes to see King Ahab, he goes to see his palace administrator, who is a chap called Obadiah. Obadiah is something of a closet hero because the king's wife, Jezebel, is making a big habit of killing prophets. Apparently there are tons of these things. I probably thought they were sort of one at a time type things, but no, there's a lot of them. To the extent even that Obadiah has hidden 100 of them in a cave to protect them. So Obadiah, goody. King Ahab and Jezebel, baddies. Obadiah then sets up the meeting, so Elijah goes to meet King Ahab, and it's a slightly bizarre turn of events, in that Elijah isn't immediately killed, as you might expect, I suppose, and he challenges King Ahab to a god-off, in the sense that we'll have a competition and see whose god wins. So I'm slightly surprised that King Ahab agrees to this, but there we go. The contest, anyway, is they get a bull, they cut it in half, they put it on separate altars, and the winner is whoever's god sets light to their offering. The prophets of Baal spend all day praying and circling and singing and doing all their whatever it is they do to try and get this thing to burst into flames, which of course it doesn't, because Baal is completely made up. Elijah, on the other hand, is so confident that he is going to win this, as he has people bring massive jars of water and pours gallons of water over his half of the bull. And then it says fire comes from the sky, not clear what form, sets light to this thing even though it's soaking wet. And, well, obviously Elijah and his God win the god off. This seems to be a proper redemptive moment for King Ahab, who then goes and kills 450 prophets of Baal. Probably a good thing, got to be said. And then it starts raining. It brings the end to the multi-year drought. In the short version of that, we have Elijah turning up, loads of miracles suddenly happen. Well, 3, I suppose. It's kind of loads, isn't it? Given that they're not really a thing. And a truly terrible king is given a pretty good chance to redeem himself. In terms of the interesting points to come out of that, the first one is that Elijah's turned up, and I sort of thought he was a big deal. Didn't know why, but along come 3 miracles in quick succession. So, you know, that sort of suggests that's the case, that he is going to be quite a big deal. The second interesting point, though, of course, is this resurrection. Is it resurrection? Is it resuscitation? I mean, the guy stopped breathing. I don't suppose they discovered CPR by this point, but I guess it's not ridiculously unheard of that someone might stop breathing and then start breathing again. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, obviously it's a story, so it might not be true anyway. But I think it feels like resurrection is a little bit of a strong word anyway. But either way, clearly that's a fairly significant turn of events, and we are at least knocking on towards the idea of resurrection, because it seems clear the guy was dead. And thirdly, I'm not going to get quite to the point of complaining about the unfairness of people having these massive experiences of God to prove that he exists, where we don't have that these days, as far as I'm aware. But you've got to say, I think King Ahab is the first proper baddie, and it's made clear he is a proper full-on baddie. He's given a golden opportunity to go, no, you're wrong, actually, look at this. And it's like, oh, yes, I mean, you've got a chance. I mean, how many people actually get that chance? And it's, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't swap with him still, but there is something niggling, at least, I guess, in that idea that at this point, this guy got that proof, as it were. And then these days, modern times, we're supposed to sort of just figure it out and all the rest of it. I don't know. That's been a theme for the last year and a bit, so I'm sure there'll be more of that. But yeah, so we will move on anyway and find out what happens next and what Elijah gets up to, and I guess whether King Ahab does actually change his ways.